Hey, nut jobs, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. And I have a great guest coming in for all of you crazy anarchists out there. And of course, we're being called crazy all the time for our belief in not aggressing against others and not robbing others. I know it is crazy in this crazy world, but we do get called that all the time. So we've got a great guest coming in, Michael Edelstein, who's a clinical psychologist. And he's written numerous books, including 3-Minute Therapy, Change Your Thinking, Change Your Life, and numerous others. He's spoken at many libertarian sort of events. I believe Walter Block is who brought him into this libertarian sort of world. And he's got a number of interesting views and things to talk about, especially for, we could talk about things like, for example, stage fright. He's written and talked about that a lot and how to help people through that, because as anarchists, as I've always said, we have to get out there and talk to people. That's the one sort of key missing part in this movement, is that many of us are just too introverted. And I know that's, we'll talk to Michael about that and just see what he thinks about introversion. But it's going to be interesting. We're going to talk to him about a number of different topics, including Ayn Rand and how he disagrees with her on her thing on self-esteem. So this is going to be very interesting. So Michael, glad to have you on. Before we get started, I have to ask you though, how did you become an anarchist?
Well, in the mid-'70s, I was a liberal Democrat and somewhat of an activist. I worked on liberal causes and worked for Democratic politicians. And then I met Walter Block through a mutual friend, and Walter and I got together because of our interest in chess. And we both lived in Brooklyn, New York at the time. So we played a lot of chess games, and in between the chess games, we debated politics. Walter was a libertarian then, and I was a liberal Democrat. I won most of the chess games, and he won the political debates. So he turned me, over the course of about 2 years, from a statist into an anarchist.
That's great. I know Walter's done that to many people. I don't know if he does it on purpose or not, but he does tend to do that. So yeah, you've been helping out sort of the libertarian anarchist community a lot with a lot of your advice and information. Maybe we should just start there. What do you see about libertarians and how they can be more effective at communication?
Well, as you said, libertarians tend to be introverted, shy, and not really forthcoming. So I help people who have unassertiveness and shyness problems. And to explain to you, Jeff, how I do that, I'd like to back up and just give you an idea of the model I work with.
Sure, take your time.
Which can be applied to a variety of areas. In fact, I think it was at a capitalism and morality conference that you were at that I gave a talk called Emotional Freedom in One Lesson. And that's based on Hazlitt's book Economics in One Lesson, where in the first chapter he gives a lesson and then applies it to various policy areas in the following chapters. So my one lesson is that our emotional disturbance and behavioral problems doesn't come from situations. So if I'm anxious about taking an exam or I'm depressed about getting fired, it's not taking the exam or doing poorly on the exam or getting fired that forces me to be anxious or depressed. That's not the right model, although most people believe in it. It's not the situation itself, but rather it's our thinking about the situation, our views, attitudes, beliefs, notions, opinions in our head, what we tell ourselves about situations that cause our emotions. Not only disturbed emotions, but feeling happy, feeling sad comes from our thinking. If we didn't think, if we didn't have a brain, situations would have no emotional or psychological impact on us. And there's a particular kind of thinking that leads to emotional disturbance, and that's thinking in terms of demands, absolutes, insisting that things absolutely have to be the way I want them to be. And there are three basic areas where people tend to do this. The first is a demand on oneself, and that starts with, because I prefer to do well and get approval, therefore, I absolutely must do well and get approval. And if I fail, I'm a no good, worthless failure. And that leads to anxiety, depression, and often unassertiveness, which is the topic you brought up in terms of libertarians. But there are two other domains also. The second is a demand not on others, not on oneself, but on others. And that takes the form of you, because I prefer you treat me well, therefore you absolutely must, you have to treat me well. And if you don't, you're a no good, rotten person. You deserve to roast in hell, and I've appointed myself your roaster. And that leads to anger, resentment, and hostility, and often war. And the third area is an impersonal condition of one's life, not a demand on oneself or others, but on situations. Life must be fair, easy, and hassle-free because I prefer it be. And if it's not, life is horrible, I'm going to be miserable forever. And that leads to procrastination and addiction, various ways of escaping the horrible reality that you've created in your mind. So the solution is get rid of all demands, get rid of all musts, reinforce your preferences and work toward achieving those, but don't insist that you absolutely have to achieve them.
Very interesting. I find this topic fascinating because I personally have gone through a lot of these things. I was incredibly shy, unbelievably shy. I've never actually seen anyone shyer than me when I was around 15 years old. I was incredibly outgoing and active and sociable when I was younger, and then something happened when I hit puberty, and all of a sudden I was just frozen. And it didn't help that I had acne, braces, a mullet. I was about 100 pounds and about 6 feet tall. You could see my ribs. Like, I definitely was going through a physical transformation that was awkward for sure, but I might have let that really, and then that caused me to spend a lot of time on my own. I didn't want to go out. I felt like a loser. I felt like I looked really bad, and I felt like I just, all of a sudden it just all happened like this. So I spent a lot of time on my computer, never really went out, and then I didn't learn how to become more sociable in a more adult environment. And that went on for a number of years until I took up rapping to get out of it and became the #2 white rapper in Canada. But it really went on for about 20 years until just probably in the last few years when I finally snapped out of it. I forced myself to do so many things. I went deep. I thought about things. I went into a bit of spirituality, a bit of meditation. This is where I think it's interesting because a lot of the stuff that you just mentioned is stuff that I learned through things like spirituality and meditation. It got me to relax with my emotions, to realize that no matter what happens, it's okay, and that I'll get through it. It's not a problem. And I came through it through that angle, but you're coming from the more psychologist sort of angle on telling people to do that.
Yes, and the approach to therapy that I use is called rational emotive behavior therapy. It was devised by Albert Ellis, pioneering psychology in the 20th century, and he developed this in the 50s. And it sounds like you sort of developed your own common sense rational emotive behavior therapy that you used on yourself, and you used a two-pronged attack. One was behavior. You forced yourself to do more things, as you said, and the other prong you used was cognitive. You reminded yourself it's okay, it's not the end of the world, no matter what happens. So that's basically in more lay terms, what I try to teach my clients. And as I said, the fears and the unassertiveness often comes from these musts. I must do well and get approval, and I have acne, I'm anxious, I'm not articulate, so I won't do well and get approval. That would be awful. That would prove I'm a rotten, worthless person, so I'll just avoid it. And that often leads to unassertiveness, shyness, those kinds of things. Also, Jeff, another thing you said illustrates part of the theory of rational emotive behavior therapy, or REBT, and that is, I think you said when you were about 15, something happened, and you started to come out of it. I think what happened was your hormones changed, and that got you going, that influenced your brain and things like that. So the REBT idea is that our personality is an interaction between our genetic predispositions, which govern our hormones, and our environment and our thinking. Now, there's a great myth that our personality comes from our childhood, the way our parents treated us, what we learned from them, traumatic events, and things like that. But that is a myth. The evidence is that most of our personality comes from our genetic predispositions, but not all of it. We can change that by changing our thinking and becoming more outgoing, becoming less anxious, less depressed, more accepting, and open to experiences in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. What's your thoughts on the Myers-Briggs sort of thing? That was something that I learned about a few years ago, and for a while I was fascinated by it. I was fascinated that you could really nail down someone's personality through this test. But I've lessened my enthusiasm about it lately because I've found that every single test gives different results. But my question to you, because you brought it up, is do you believe someone is naturally introverted? And if so, is there a way that they can get out of that?
Yes, I believe that people have predispositions to be introverted, to be anxious, to have certain personality traits, but you definitely can get out of it, as you did, by pushing yourself to act against your natural tendencies and changing your thinking. So I think both are the case. In terms of the Myers-Briggs, I'm glad to see that you're getting away from it, and you came up with a good insight that at different times the same test with the same person could give different results depending on what mood you're in. Actually, there's some evidence that where you take the test affects it. If you take it, if you're an adult and you take it at home where you grew up, you get different results than if you take it in your office. Those kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the thing about that, and you mentioned Walter Block earlier, once Walter Block and I took a Myers-Briggs, and we came up with very different personality variables, which surprised me since we agree and have similar outlooks on so many different things. So it's very iffy to what extent that's useful. I think there are certain personality variables you can look at that are somewhat useful, and that is assertiveness or unassertiveness, extroversion and introversion, type A and type B. So those tend to be fairly constant in certain situations, but even with that, it often depends on the situation. For example, I also have a tendency to be introverted. However, when I'm talking to people about psychology or libertarianism, you can't shut me up. Yet if I'm in a social group, and which involves small talk and things like that, I'm not very accomplished. So these personality variables tend to be situational as well.
Yeah, when I'm in a small talk environment, especially around non-anarchists, I just have no interest in the conversation. But I think that's normal, isn't it? Like, I'm just not interested. Like, why would I want to interact? These topics do not interest me. What's your take on that?
Well, as far as normal, it's normal for you and me to react like that, but it's normal for a lot of people to love just to sit around a beer and talk about all kinds of things that don't interest you and me. So I don't know if there's an actual normal, but I think the idea is to find out what your interests are, what your strengths are, and then go with that. So that's what you and I have done.
Yeah, you mentioned having a beer and chatting. If I do have drinks, I can do it. And I actually have used alcohol numerous times throughout my life for what I considered to be some of the issues that I had, which was just fairly, I think, introverted, fairly shy, just not socially outgoing. And for decades, literally, I would use alcohol. I would not want, if I don't drink, or in the past, I've changed, I continue to change, I continue to try to grow. But in the past, if I didn't have any drinks, I wouldn't want to leave my house. I just didn't really have much interest at all. I'd rather be on my computer reading or learning things and things like that. But I became a totally different person when I drank. And so I used that for a number of years. And actually, if you go back to Anarchast episode 1, that was very uncomfortable for me. That was the first time I ever did a YouTube podcast. And if you look at it, it's very embarrassing to me just to see how bad I was. But I had a few glasses of wine before I did that. And I did that before almost every single one for about 100 or more of them. And what I learned through the process is it actually, it would have been better if I didn't drink, actually. It would have been better if I just forced myself to learn these things, just go through the pain of it and get through it, rather than going through years and years of drinking and drinking, trying to get more comfortable. So I think a lot of people do use things as a crutch, like alcohol.
Yeah, and I agree with you that the elegant solution would have been not to use the alcohol and go through it. On the other hand, there is something to be said to using a crutch if it gets you out there and gets you going. And it's interesting because when people use alcohol to sleep or to perform better, feel more relaxed, there's somewhat of a negative view on that. Yet when people take prescription drugs to do the same thing, then that seems okay. But in many ways, people use alcohol the way some other people use prescription drugs as a self-medication. And if that helps you to some extent, you don't overdo it, it's really not that bad. But of course, the best solution is what you found out eventually. Just face the music, face your anxiety, and learn to live with your anxiety, because humans are anxious. We all get anxious at times. And the more you learn to deal with that and move on with your life with anxiety, paradoxically, the less anxiety you'll tend to create for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say at the beginning, alcohol was great for getting me to bust out of my shell a little bit. But I guess what I'm saying is that I began to use it too much as a crutch, and I actually realized about probably a year ago that it was becoming a negative. I wasn't thinking as clearly. And then once I finally just got rid of it and just stopped using it as a crutch, I finally began to really do well. And now I actually have no anxiety, no introversion whatsoever. I could be on CNN right now and I'd be the exact same as right now. I could be in front of 100,000 people talking. I'd be the same, because I've done it so many times. It's just like anything. You just have to, just like when you go to the gym, you just have to keep doing it until you finally get good at it.
Yes. Well, there are two aspects to that. One, as you say, Jeff, is doing it, but it's also changing your thinking about it, because if every time you do it, you convince yourself, well, I've done well before at this, but this time, what if I fall on my face? That would be awful. That would prove that I'm worthless, and people would hate me, and I couldn't stand that. So if you continue to give yourself the wrong message about it, then you could continue to feel anxious. In fact, there was a famous actress who illustrates this. Her name is Helen Hayes, and actually there's a theater on Broadway named after her, the Helen Hayes Theater. And she said all her life, before the curtain went up, she was very anxious, panicky, because she said, what if I screw up this time? Wouldn't that be awful? That would be a shame. I couldn't stand it. So it's changing your thinking as you did, along with pushing yourself again and again and again to face your fears and take risks.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, is that a lot of the anxiety and the fear comes from this expectation you have of yourself and the thing that you think will happen if you don't meet that expectation. And I just, over the last few years, I don't care what people think about me. I've realized, because I've screwed up so many times, literally thousands and thousands of times in public, that it doesn't really matter. The next day you wake up, the birds are chirping, and you just go back to things. It's not the end of the world. So that's how I kind of got through that. So this is really good, and I hope a lot of people out there are getting some good information here. Let's get into the Ayn Rand self-esteem thing. I'm quite interested in this as well, because I still don't get the Objectivism Ayn Rand sort of thing. And just a funny sort of story, I don't know if this is related or not, but I have a friend who came from Objectivism, and he's now an anarchist, and he still agrees with a lot of the Objectivist stuff. But every time he does something, like he'll say, I just planted a flower in my backyard. I'm so proud of myself. And he keeps saying that. And one day I brought it up. I said, you're really proud of yourself, aren't you? And he said, well, I come from Objectivism. So that's what he said to me. I don't understand what he's talking about. Like, well, what is that? Why do you say you're proud of everything? So maybe you could just go into your thoughts on Objectivism and self-esteem from Nathaniel Branden and things like that.
Oh, certainly. And there's, well, let's start with the definition of self-esteem. To esteem means to think highly of something, and self-esteem means to think highly of oneself. So what your friend was saying is, I planted this flower, I did a good thing, which is fine, and therefore I'm a good person, and that leads to pride. But that's a problem, because there's many problems with that, because to say you're a good person, to rate your total self based on your behavior, is unempirical, it's illogical, it doesn't work, it's impractical, it doesn't help you with your life in the long run. So there are many problems with that. It's unempirical because all you see is people living their life doing things. That's empirical, that's you can see, but you don't see good people or bad people. You don't see people walking around with wings and a halo, the good people, and then you don't see people walking around in a devil suit with horns and a tail, the bad people. All you see is people doing things. So all we have in the world is people who do good things at times, bad things at times. Some people are approved of and popular at times, and other people the opposite. But these are always their actions, their behaviors, not their worth, their total selves, their being, or their personhood. So the main problem with the whole self-esteem idea is rating one's total self based on the rating of one's behavior. A good act doesn't equal a good person. People are a process, they're always changing. You do good and bad things every day in terms of your goals. So there's no point to rating yourself. Now, Nathaniel Branden and Ayn Rand had a different view. They did think self-rating was a good idea based on certain behaviors, so which they called authentic self-esteem. If you had authentic self-esteem, if you rated your total self, evaluated your total self based on the behaviors and actions they thought were right. And Nathaniel Branden, in one of his books, The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, listed 6 different behaviors which, if you do well, make you a good person, deserving of authentic self-esteem. And those were the practice of living consciously, the practice of self-acceptance, the practice of self-responsibility, the practice of self-assertiveness, the practice of living purposefully, and the practice of personal integrity. But if you shrink it down to what it's all about, it's about certain behaviors. Now, you could do very well at being responsible or having high integrity. You could do well in those areas, but there's no bridge from doing well in those areas to being a good person. So that's the basic problem. So self-esteem is rating the total self. It's an overgeneralization. It's sort of like saying, if I got down on all fours and barked and acted like a dog and ate my food out of a dog bowl, I'm now a dog. Well, that's just my behaviors. I'm acting like a dog. I can't magically become a dog. And I can lose at certain things in life, but I don't magically become a loser, just like I don't magically become a dog. There was a humorous perspective on this in the early 60s, I think it was. There was a TV talk show host named Joe Pine, who was a very acerbic talk show host, and he lost part of his leg as a result of cancer and had a wooden leg. And he had Frank Zappa, an early rock and roller, as a guest. And when Frank Zappa came on stage, Joe Pine's first remark was, "You have long hair. That means you're a girl." And Frank Zappa came back and said, "You have a wooden leg. That means you're a table." And that shows how overgeneralization works or doesn't work in this case. And that's the same thing when we say, I did a good thing, I planted some flowers, I'm a good person. So there are many problems with that.
Interesting. Yeah, you've got so many interesting topics that you can talk about. I know you talked about libertarian burnout before, and this is something that I've seen a lot, and I've felt it myself. Although I just usually have a good night's sleep and get right back to it, but it can, if you get really into something and you're really passionate about it, and you, for whatever reason, just don't see any progress, or you see just too much negativity, you can get a little bit burnt out on it, for sure. Absolutely. I think to some extent, Stefan Molyneux is an example of that. And I that's just my opinion. I don't know for sure, but it appears to me like, and I understand this because I've had days where I've had all kinds of anarchists attacking me over some little thing, and I just want to just get out of this little world that we're in, and you can get burnt out. So you have some ideas on libertarian burnout and that sort of a thing.
Yes. A way to look at this is in terms of the ABC model that was developed by Albert Ellis. A is the activating event, for example, the situation. In this case, the situation is I'm seeing little progress in the world moving toward libertarianism. And C is your emotional consequences about that. And in this case, it's burnout. So at A, there's little progress that you see, and you're working hard at it, so you don't feel like you're getting very far. And then C, you feel burned out. But as I was saying earlier, it's never A that causes C. It's never a situation like no progress, no matter how bad, that forces you to be depressed, hopeless, burned out at C, but rather it's B. B is your belief about the situation, what you tell yourself about little progress. And it starts with, I strongly, passionately desire to make some inroads into the statism all around me. And that makes sense, and that leads to passion and drive and motivation and determination. But then, being an imperfect human, you tend to escalate that passion, that preference, into demand. I must make a difference. I have to see progress along these lines. It's the end of the world, or I'm a worthless failure if I don't. And that's what leads to C. That's what leads to the burnout. So thinking in terms of preferences leads to motivation and passion. That's great. But then making it into a must, a demand, an 11th commandment, it has to be this way, otherwise it's horrible, leads to burnout. So it helps to have moderate goals rather than high expectations. But even with moderate goals, if you have a must, that I must see progress in the next 5 or 10 years, then you're likely to feel anxious in advance because you know you may not, and then depressed at some point along the line when you don't think you're getting very far. So the solution is to question, challenge, and contradict your musts. There's never ever any evidence things absolutely have to be your way, although it would be great, it would be wonderful if there was some progress. So show yourself in many ways that the musts are false. There's never anything that has to happen. Maybe we could say one day we all have to die, but Ray Kurzweil is working on that. But in terms of things going our way or being successful or getting people to like us, there's no reason why that has to be the way we want it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting how people can get really tied to these things. And I know we're actually quite lucky. Anyone who's out there watching this who's a libertarian or an anarchist, you are super lucky because people like Walter Block and Murray Rothbard and all the predecessors of this ideology or philosophy or way of thinking, they really had a very small amount of growth. I think Murray Rothbard was quoted as saying he only knew about 7 anarchists in the world, and they were mostly in his living room in New York in the 70s. Now it is truly, truly growing. So we live in quite good times compared to the last few decades. And I started this way of thinking around 2002, and it was really slow even then. And the changes now that I'm seeing every month almost, the Libertarian Party national presidential debate, or whatever they call it, with two past Anarchast guests, John McAfee and Judd Weiss, who just announced he's going to be his vice president candidate. I'm going to have Judd on Anarchast soon to talk about that. They were on national TV in the U.S. I see things happening every day. So we're actually, anyone who's getting burnt out at this point, they really should be questioning what's burning them out exactly, because if their goal is to see this progress, it's definitely progressing. So we have that part of it that is quite lucky. Now, the other thing that really sort of burns people out or turns people off of the movement is the infighting. That has become rife over the last few years. And the funny thing is, 10 years ago, there wasn't a lot of infighting because there wasn't a lot of us. And so if you knew anyone who was a libertarian or anarchist, you were like, oh, I'm so glad there's another one. And now there's so many of us that they're starting to argue amongst themselves and start to bicker about minutia points about these things, which I don't think is very productive. Now, I think there is a place to be arguing every little detail, but we don't need the majority of us out there doing that. We can leave that to people like Walter Block, who will write an entire book on a very small piece of the topic of the philosophy. So what's your take on that, Michael, on the infighting with libertarians?
Well, I think that there are two kinds of infighting. One kind, I think, is productive and interesting and sometimes entertaining. Walter Block and Bob Wenzel just had a debate on the Tom Woods show. Walter has a group called Libertarians for Trump, and Bob Wenzel is against it. So they had a very friendly, interesting debate about that idea, and I think that's fine, and it's an interesting diversion from the more serious aspects of libertarianism and what's going on. But the infighting that leads to anger, resentment, burnout, those kinds of things, is a problem for the libertarian movement and other movements also. It exists in all different movements. And that also comes from a demand, a must, which is because I prefer you to see things my way, the right way, of course, therefore you absolutely must, you have to. And if you disagree, you're a rotter, and you don't deserve to speak or breathe or anything like that, so I'll have nothing to do with you, and that also leads to more destructive aspects of the movement, and sometimes people leaving the movement and vilifying other people and those kinds of things. So again, it's the must, the should, that's the problem, and not friendly debates. It's good to, one of the aspects of debating with people and disagreeing with them is that you could both come to a higher conclusion, an improvement on the philosophy through sharing different views. Sometimes I compare these musts with the state, and this is a similarity between rational emotive behavior therapy and anarchism, because the anarchist solution really is get rid of the state, abolish the state. The state doesn't do good. It just makes things worse. And the same with thinking in terms of demands and absolutes and musts. The solution is get rid of your musts. Musts don't do any good. They just lead to emotional disturbance and behavioral self-defeat. So if you get rid of your musts, you get inner freedom. And if you get rid of the state, you get external freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the traps that a lot of people can fall into is when they're new to this.
Also, Jeff,
go ahead.
To go back to something.
Yep.
Just to get back to something you said earlier about drinking, we were discussing, well, sometimes alcohol could be helpful, sometimes not. So a question that often comes up is, how can you tell if you drink alcohol or you smoke marijuana or you smoke cigarettes or whatever it is, how can you tell whether what you're doing is a good idea or a bad idea? And there's one criteria you can use, and that is, does this habit the drinking, for example, does that interfere with, block, or sabotage your long-term goals? So if it does, if there are more disadvantages to what you're doing than advantages, then it's a good idea to stop or moderate. And if there are more advantages than disadvantages, short-term and long-term, then it seems fine. So you could use that criteria to make a decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I did. It became more negatives than positives at one point. So I just decided to stop using that crutch. One of the traps that a lot of people fall into is as soon as they learn about this philosophy, and this happened to me. This happened to me around 2002, 2003. Once I started learning about this, I was so excited and I was so passionate about it that I felt like I had to get out there and tell everyone about it and be very people are people. You can't just walk up and say, hey, you're wrong, you're an idiot, here's why. That will end the thing right away. And a lot of people will almost do that once they learn about this. And it's not necessarily their fault totally that they're doing that. I can understand why they're doing it. It's because they're so passionate about it. So if you're watching this, you just got into anarchism maybe in the last year or two, or even less, you probably feel like you're full of these information that hardly anyone knows, and you think it could be so advantageous to the world if people knew about it. But don't rush out there and tell everyone like you're the authority. That's not going to work. Just talk to people like regular people. You do have some really good information, but listen to what they're saying as well and have that conversation. So Michael, it's been really great having you on. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to cover, but I know that you were trying to get to Anarchapulco this year. We couldn't get you down in time. Hopefully you can come in Anarchapulco 2017, which is going to be at the end of February 2017. But why don't you let people know anything else you want to talk about as well? Let them know where they can find out more information on yourself, your books, or anything else.
Okay, yeah. Just in terms of getting out there and spreading the message, I have two communication strategies that might be useful. And the first one is when you speak to someone, before you jump right in and tell them why they're wrong, try to understand their perspective so you know what you're criticizing, rather than assuming you know what they're thinking because their words are familiar to you. So I would try to start by asking questions about what they say to find out what they really believe and why they believe it. And also, I think it's important to define terms, because often you might be debating about something, for example, capitalism. You think capitalism is good, they think capitalism is bad. And if you define your terms, you find out that you really agree, you're just using capitalism to mean different things. So often left-wingers use the word capitalism to mean corporatism or state capitalism, yes, not what we're talking about, laissez-faire capitalism. So it's good to define your terms and to ask them to define their terms.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in terms, if people want to have any questions about what I discussed, or want to get more information, they can get my book, 3-Minute Therapy, which is available in Kindle and hardcover version. They can go to my website, 3minutetherapy.com. 3 is spelled out, THREE, it's all one word. And my email address is there, my phone number is there. So I'd be happy to speak with you further and answer any questions.
That's great. Thank you for helping all of us half-insane anarchists out there. Help us to get better at improving ourselves and understanding what causes things like anxiety and introversion and helping to get through it. We'll have the links to all your stuff down below. Really appreciate you coming on. Hopefully we'll see you at Anarchapulco 2017. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, share down below. It's really important. That's all you got to do. If we're not asking for money here. We're not doing anything. I'm actually spending a lot of my own time and money doing these things. Just hit like or share or anything like that. It really helps to get the videos out there, because that's the goal of this, is to get this information out there. So that's it for Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.
Are we wired for misery or happiness? Are we doomed to stand naked in a pool of our own devices, dared to fearlessly claim who we are inside, destined to have that ripped, suffocated, and choked from our very fiber? Or are we fated for freedom? freedom, for virtuosity, for love, for joy, for insurmountable experience that seeps into our pores and douses us with glorious wonderment. At this moment, we are bound for the former as a human race, but there are a small few that will escape the trap of human suffering by viewing the shadows on the wall as only mere shadows of the reality of what is to come.
Gaddafi was not a good guy. Neither was Saddam Hussein, and neither is Bashar al-Assad. I mean, they're all criminals, but they're absolutely no worse than the people that are running the U.S. government or any other governments. No difference at all. They're the same personality types. Absolutely, no difference at all.
They're just
and the average stupid American.
From Acapulco, Mexico, this is Anarchast.